term. It says, and God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Right? They're telling you all about this in the book of Genesis. And by the way, does anybody know that the word Genesis even means the genes of the goddess Isis? Or the generation of Isis? Implying something? And in fact, the Bible, when it uses the word created, it's actually a mistranslation of a word that is actually more like our word build or construct. You know? So this is what we also have the term the firstborn. In the Bible, what we have to understand, because also, think of it, why would the angel of death or God, like even in Herod, you know, and later on in before in the Pharaoh's time, what would be the importance of going and killing the firstborn of your enemies? Sure, wouldn't it be smarter to go and kill your enemy and have done with it? Why are you going to wait to kill all his firstborns? See? And secondly, no such atrocity happened. There's never any record of any massacre of any innocents or anything like that in physical record at all. So the firstborn is another one of these cryptic terms, and it's a reference to the sons of the serpent race, also known as the children of the Elohim. Some people might want to call the original serpent masters the Jehovah clan, the term that's spoken of in the Bible, and others might want to call the first group, their firstborn, the Elohim. Now, Christians will not understand this. What are you talking about? There is a rule of thumb that you can use in the Bible to make things a lot easier, and that is whenever you're hearing a term like that, especially Adam and Eve and Jehovah and Elohim, try to think less of an individual and more as a race. Okay, a group of people at least. And then things will start to be clear. Now they created this firstborn to serve them. And they did it by genetically changing the human and alien DNA together at the place we call Atlantis. But as time went by, maybe hundreds of years, nobody knows exactly the dates. The original visitation, of course, was what? 50,000 years ago. And we have, from that time, a great deluge. Remember when the planet Tiamat was destroyed, it said its debris fell into the earth and created enormous cataclysms. But it didn't create a pole shift, it just created enormous cataclysms that changed the face of the earth forever. But at least that kind of contamination slowly did subside over time. It was devastating, and many, many people died, and lots of changes in the land. But it was not so awesome, you see, that over a few hundred years, a certain amount of normalcy did not come back. Because the earth has been visited by that kind of trouble many, many times. But anyway, when they created this firstborn, they sent the firstborn out to be their servants, to actually go out into the Garden of Eden, into Atlantis, Appalachia, and their territories that they were conquering, and do their physical work for them. But after a certain period of time, these sons of the serpent had the human DNA. And therefore they had the humanity, the humanism, and the sense of spiritual connectedness to things, that sensibility that their own fathers didn't have. And it dawned on these sons of the serpent that finally they realized, to cut a long story short, that they didn't want to serve these masters anymore, because they probably didn't agree with them and didn't like doing this and didn't feel that they should be subservient. And it's interesting too, because they had the high intelligence and the divine spiritual connection. So they left. They actually upped and left as a race. Probably not all of them, but whatever the group of these sons of the serpent, they actually exited out of Appalachia, out of Atlantis, and resituated their own civilization on the continent of Oceania, which we now call Lemuria, which is estimated to be where the Pacific is, you see. And they completely left, just exited out, leaving their alien fathers with a predicament of what to do. So what they did is they went back to the drawing board again to create another entity. It says, let us make him who shall nourish and sustain us. What shall we do to be invoked? To be remembered in earth. We have tried with our first creatures, look at this, but we could not make them venerate us. So then let us try to make obedient, respectful beings who shall nourish and sustain us. This is from a Mexican book, the Popol Vuh. Do you know the conquistadors, how many books they burned? You want to know why? If this is one little piece of one little book, right? Think what those books really contained, and now find out why they were burned. The first creatures wouldn't do it, so we go to the second. Genesis, by the sweat of thy face will be thy bread, until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust thou art, and to dust thou wilt return. Does that sound like God talking to somebody? Or is it more of human politics? And the Lord said, behold, the man has become one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now, the interesting thing is that they did create another being, and that being they called the Adamic race, or we refer to now as the Adam. But again, not an individual. The Adams and Eves were created, but they were called the Adamic race. And they had to think, when they created the second generation offspring, they thought to themselves, what did we do the first time that was wrong? What we did the first time it was wrong is we gave the power to our first sons, the firstborn, the intellectual abilities and genius that we ourselves possess. And that's why they got all arrogant and took off. So the next time we make a group, our servants, we will literally dumb them down. We will close off the centers of the high intelligences that we have, the technological intelligences and so on. And I mean, you can do that in a laboratory, a behaviorist laboratory now, just using the brain synapses. But they were doing it on a DNA level. So that's exactly what they did. They created a being whose intelligence level would be much more suppressed, and that was the Adamic race, and they sent them out to be the servants. And they had a feminine counterpart that could not at that time breed through mating, but they were feminine, the female versions. And the Lord said, look, the people are united, and they all have one language. Come on, let us go down, and therefore confound their language so that they cannot understand one another's speech. Now, as I said, in the Bible, you'll hear certain terms, and you'll hear this term naked, that Adam and Eve went into the garden naked. Well, what does that mean? That God was wearing Levi jeans then, and everybody had clothes? The word naked is another, euphemism, a cryptic euphemism in the Bible that refers to a state of being in intellectual ignorance, nakedness, into the garden in a naked state, meaning that they had suppressed intelligence. But in reduced intelligence of what, specifically? Remember how I just quoted those books where it says they cannot eat of the tree of life? Remember that? Well, the forbidden fruit, this term, the forbidden fruit of the tree of life, is another euphemism for the knowledge of human genetics. Because the tree of life symbol has always been the symbol for that, for what we call the caduceus of Hermes, or the DNA spiral. In ancient times it was known as the caduceus of Hermes, or before that the tree of life, because that's exactly what it is. And they said it has its roots in the earth and its branches in heaven. And then later that tree became known as the tree of good and evil. And all the people who think they're into the occultism go, oh, the tree of good and evil, thinking that means something esoteric. Actually, it doesn't. This term does not refer to anything esoteric. It refers only to the two contingents or races and residents on this planet, both custodians and utilizers of the knowledge of genetics. The good and the evil, for want of a better term. It's their tree, meaning their knowledge. So naked and not being able to eat off the tree of life, not being able to eat of the fruit of the tree of life, is a euphemism for the Adamic race not having the intellectual ability that their masters had, the high scientific, technical knowledge of reproduction on that level, and the science of biology and technology. And that's what these symbols all refer to. Do you know in the Kabbalistic tree of life, anybody familiar with this? There are 22 paths. 22? Anybody in the genetics know the number 22 and the chromosomes on the DNA? So when we read about the forbidden fruit, we've got to ask ourselves a question. This symbol is even styrated in the symbols of the chakras, or an analog to that, right? The forbidden fruit relates to genetics. If it doesn't, why is a technical company that expressly involves itself in technology having the same symbol from the book of Revelation? And they're not the only corporation that do this, there's many others.